Chairman, I'll yield back.
We're going to go to Senator Moreno next, and I may have to leave for a few minutes. He will take over the committee, and I will go to another committee and come back in just a few minutes. But Senator Moreno, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, you've invested, give me a sense of how many companies Andreessen Horowitz has invested in since the time you were there to start in the firm. A sense of scale, like how many, off the top of your head?
It's been thousands.
Thousands?
Yes, sir.
Has any company you've ever invested in, where you actually put your private capital and your partner's capital in, ever been run the way the United States government is run in terms of excessive cost, inefficiency, bureaucracy, and ineptitude?
Well, thank you, Senator. We certainly have had CEOs who sometimes have different skill sets in some of these areas, but certainly as an investor, one of the things we focus on as board members is ultimately, return on investment. And what that means in the private sector is, do we have somebody who understands what they're spending, why they're spending, what they're getting out of that? And we've certainly had times where those CEOs have had to make changes, unfortunately, in employment and otherwise, in order to affect those outcomes.
Do you think $2 trillion a year in deficits, paying $1 trillion a year in interest is a sustainable path?
No, Senator, and obviously, as you and I have talked, and as I reiterated my opening statement today, I believe we are on an unsustainable fiscal path, and I think we need to help the American people understand that, just as they do with their own checkbooks, that the federal government needs to be held to the same standards.
And who's going to pay the price? Like, if you say unsustainable path, like, who pays the price? Is it people of our generation, 30-year-olds like you and I? Who pays the price for this ineptitude?
No, sir. Ultimately, look, what we are doing is effectively creating an unsurmountable debt for, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. And it's just fundamentally unfair, and it's something that I do believe we need to address.
So the status quo is just no longer acceptable. Is that fair?
Yes, Senator.
And then going back to the Office of Personnel Management, you, again, thousands of companies. I owned several companies myself prior to being here. How many companies have you ever seen, like in your entire career, where 69% of the employees are rated above average? Give me a sense of like how many.
Yeah, I've never seen a company that's been successful that has that level of rating.
Meaning if it were accurate. In other words,
that's correct. Yes.
What would you do if you found the CEO that could have created a team of people where almost 70% of the people are at the top rating?
Yeah, so either this is the most incredible set of workforce we've ever seen, or as you're suggesting, it just really defies logic at the end of the day. And look, this is important not only to ensure that we have accountability, but it's also important from a compensation and incentives perspective, right? We want people who are doing well, quite frankly, to be recognized. I think we should recognize federal employees who are fantastic, and let's pay them appropriately. Let's give them promotions. But we have to have a system that doesn't peanut butter out effectively incentives and that does distinguish between top performers and, unfortunately, people who are not doing their roles.
Yeah, and hiring is hard, right? I mean, hiring is hard. In my company, we used to say, take a long time to hire and a short time to fire. Because hiring is hard. You have an interview and you try to get the best sense of who's going to work there, but ultimately, you have a batting average and you want to do as well as you can. Have you ever had a CEO that was so good at hiring that only 0.4% of the workforce was below average?
No, Senator.
That could bat at 99.6%.
No, Senator.
That would be remarkable. I mean, like that person would be CEO of the world ever, right? They would put a statue of that person. So we have to fix that, right? Because nothing's worse in an organization than working with inept people. Because if you're a high performer and you're surrounded by people that aren't pulling their weight, aren't doing the job they're supposed to do, it's insanely demoralizing. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And if I could just, Senator, I mean, look, I think you're exactly right, which is this is an issue of fairness to the people who are actually doing great work. So this is not a demonization, quite frankly, of the workforce. This is a recognition that when great people do great work, quite frankly, we should reward them for that. And everybody knows that if you have an organization where people are not performing, the right and the humane thing, quite frankly, to do is either, if you can counsel them and fix them, that's great. But if they can't perform, it is to go have them do some other place where they can actually exercise their appropriate skills.
Well, thank you, Scott. I look forward to confirming you. Thank you for doing this. I'm sure there's a lot of other things in your life that you could do than this. So thank you for serving your country.
Thank you.
Eric, mind if I call you Eric, because Yulin, I don't know, it's too complicated to pronounce. But
Tell me about it.
First of all, your daughter's always a shining star in the cloakroom. I don't know how she always smiles like that, but she's great. Real briefly, in 20 seconds or less, do you think it's fair that the taxpayers of this country do not know that we have people here in Washington, D.C. that are willing to send $40 or $50 billion a year to foreign countries to help foreign citizens in foreign countries when our people need help. Our seniors are struggling. Our middle class is struggling. We have a problem with housing. And yet we have a government that prioritizes sending tens of billions of dollars to foreign countries. Do you think the average American understands that this government has done that?
No, Senator, I still don't believe that the average American understands it, but I believe the average American understands where President Trump stands, the agenda he's set, the objectives he's laid out, the goals he expects all of us to accomplish, and the mission set that we have to deliver courtesy of his mandate.
And as the temporary chairman, I'm going to tell myself I'm out of time and I have to move on. So I will recognize my fellow Colombian, Senator Gallego.
Gracias. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.